network bandwidth, like it's the one ambient, abundant thing in the internet that we all have. I don't know where you are, but like here, I've got like 800 megabits up. I'm not using it. I'm using 0.05% of that on a daily basis, right? The topology of the internet at the moment is that way, where we have enormous amounts of redundant upstream bandwidth, and we can utilize that. And we should be able to, as contributors to the network, by being a node within that graph of the internet, we're contributing, and we should be able to reap the benefits of that.
Yeah, welcome back to the Building in Public podcast. I saw you guys had raised a nice seed round, so 3.5 million recently, I think a couple months ago, and I saw some candid tweets about the process from you. So just walk us through like what that was like. You know, how long did it take? What was your experience going through a seed raise? Had you done it before? You know, et cetera.
Yeah. I'm a third time founder. But this is my first time raising as a CEO. Like I'm a career software engineer, and CTO for my previous ventures. And so, yeah, it was kind of a new experience for me. Actually, I raised as CEO into my previous company, which is actually a game studio. I'm one of those people crazy and passionate and stupid enough to actually launch a game studio. But this was a bigger vision. This was a bigger raise. This was a bigger process. Our lead, we actually did 2 rounds this year. So we did an angel round, which was led by Blockchain Founders Fund. Ali Madavi, founder of Blockchain Founders Fund, is a previous investor in previous ventures. So he kicked us off, and they were great. We rolled into a pre-seed round led by Blockchain Ventures. Matt Amerso and John Squire and Rob and crowd over there, and Bactison led that round, and they really get it. Like applying blockchain to real business cases is their jam, and you know that's our background. My 2 co-founders, Polasti Bandara, who's our CTO, we call him Paul. He's I've been kicking around with him for like 10 years. We've done 5 ventures together. We're like old school comrades. Yeah, so that's pretty smooth. And then our third co-founder, Justin Tomlinson, who's our chief commercial officer, he's a bit older than us. He's got a background in broadcast and stuff, and so he's pretty heavyweight. He's been like CTO in 3 FTSE 30 companies, and knows his way around a boardroom, let's say. So it was pretty smooth. We took our time. There's so much capital sloshing around in Web3, you know, you don't want it all. And you know, we found a really solid bunch of people that are here for a multi-cycle play. You know, what we're building is a serious piece of technology. It's foundational to what we see as the future of technology, and not just blockchain, but you know, the wider application of technology, the internet, AI, and beyond. So we're really happy with the mix that we've got. But we're gearing up for there was actually a pre-seed round that we raised. So we raised 3.5 mil in total. And we're gearing up for a seed round. We're actually going to open up early next year. So we're just locking in the lead for that. And yeah, never stop raising, right?
For sure. Strike while the iron is hot in terms of market timing, in terms of, you know, company progress, all of that stuff. So it sounds like you had a pretty smooth raise and process, right? Serial entrepreneur, I've done this before, had support, had kind of a lead very early on. But for a lot of first-time founders, which is not you, but you know, a lot of other people, they don't have as easy of a time. So what advice would you have to a first-time founder that's looking to raise crypto VC funding?
Honestly, it would be disingenuous to say it was cruisy and I just walked in there and left with the bag. That's not how it goes, right? It's always a hustle, and it's hard, right? It's hard. There's a lot of just like continuous comms and just keeping everybody up to date with what's going on, and anxiety as well, because you got these waiting periods and these relatively deep dive DD investments where you're going, you know, hardcore into something, and at the end of the day, it's like, you know, it's not for us, and then that can knock you about a little bit. So it wasn't super easy. We did an all-nighter for one of the big accelerators for one of the biggest exchanges. And me and Paul ended up doing an all-nighter to pull off a live demonstration for them. And they ended up passing on it, right? And we put our hearts and souls into that. So you have those experiences along the way where you do get knocked about a bit and you're like, oh gosh. I think if you're first time going in, just lead with the values, find your people, and they're out there, right? And just be wary, man, because there's a lot of capital there, mercenary capital that's just into to ride the market and dump on the community, and that's not what we're trying to do here in terms of decentralized tech. And that's pretty problematic. So take it slow, be careful, do your own DD, and find your people.
Yeah, I like that. Find your people really resonates. Like I think not everything, but most of the things I've been able to accomplish in crypto have been as a result of the help of other people or people that believe in me at a very early stage, or just like the network that I've built. Like you stay in crypto for at least a couple years and you start to realize that everything becomes much easier. It's almost like playing the game on easy mode. Once you have a network of people that like and they like you and they believe in you, and you can just like go to people that you know to get things done versus like pitching people you've never met before. I mean, you have to do some of that, right? We're trying to sell things to customers you've never met before. But once you know people in positions of various influence within the crypto world, like everything becomes a lot easier. And obviously these are people that have similar values, right? Or else you wouldn't be friends, or you wouldn't have kept in touch with them, or whatever else.
It's network effects, right? And it's funny. This is what we're doing with Rilla Network, right? We optimize. We're optimization algorithms for collaboration networks, right? That's what we do, and that's what you're describing there, right? If you really do enter the network of the entire industry by finding your people and finding the people with which your mission resonates, then that cascades and just compounds exponentially in terms of the connections that then follow on from that. And you're right, it starts to become easy mode. I'm easy mode. I'm not sure I like that. I don't think it should ever be easy mode, but it helps a lot.
Easier mode.
Easier
mode. How about that? Yeah. Well, yeah. Let's talk about Rilla. So, I mean, would you classify it as a decentralized CDN in terms of kind of broadly the company's kind of mission, or how would you categorize yourselves?
I think that's really understanding what we're doing for a bunch of reasons. I'll try and sort of keep it high level and just sort of put the scaffolding around it before we deep dive into any of the specifics. But I mean, Rilla Networks, like the core technology is an open protocol and toolkit for what we call intelligent collaboration networks. And the core of that technology is kind of two main components. It's the orchestration and optimization of peer-to-peer networks, and then the attribution and distribution of value based on the contribution of peers within those peer-to-peer networks. And so what we have is, on one side, neural networks being trained and fine-tuned to orchestrate those collaboration networks to essentially collaborate in the most optimal way based on the task that they're trying to achieve. And then on this side, off-chain proofs that act as kind of receipts of contribution that compound and represent the contribution there, which allow us to programmatically distribute very granular amounts of value based on small contributions within those peer-to-peer networks. So that's the core of what we call, intelligent collaboration networks. And this is the underlying technology. But you talked about CDN, right? And the initial implementation, reference implementation of this technology is in live streaming. And so what we're running at is CDN, like the old incumbent infrastructure approach to live streaming is edge CDN, where we're using like HLS and Dash to make chunks available, and then your player is just pulling those chunks and sort of putting them together in your player to play them back to back. And really that whole thing is kind of a hack around the way that the internet is, the way that like HTTPS and like the requests sort of model of the internet is designed, right? And streaming is like the requirements of live streaming, if you break them down to first principles, are quite different to that. And so what we're doing with live streaming is based on a couple of key facts. So one fact about live streaming infrastructure is that it's really expensive. It costs a hell of a lot of money. The other fact is that 95% plus of that cost is just network. And so it's not GPU bound workloads or compute bound workloads. It's actually just the network bandwidth of delivering that content. And so in a centralized system, we're paying the CDNs essentially for the right to move this information around the internet. And what we do is push that network cost out into the audience by orchestrating that collaboration network so that everybody in the audience is acting as a contributor by contributing upstream bandwidth. And what that looks like is just a peer-to-peer cascading set of relays that send live content that they're all watching together to each other. And this reduces the dependency on CDN and in turn reduces the cost dramatically for broadcasters. So this is one sort of reference implementation of intelligent collaboration networks where we're showing how we can unlock enormous amounts of value in large scale live streaming. And we're working with some of the biggest sports streamers in the world to demonstrate really the power of this technology. And so when you look at that, just sort of finalize that whole picture of what the value is there, it's not just the unlocking of the value and the reduction of cost. Because in CDN, that's really just a race to the bottom at the moment. If you look at that, the sort of infrastructure wars between the big players in CDN, where we see a real differentiation for the protocols, being able to then show interesting ways of redistributing that value amongst those audience members. And at the highest level, we talk about turning passive audiences into active networks. And this is when you really start to move the needle on things that these sports broadcasters really care about. They care about engagement. They care about churn. When the football season ends, people just churn out of their services, right? And so what we're able to do is by highlighting how they're contributing to the network, redistribute some of that value in interesting and engaging ways to audience members. And there's a whole gamification framework and interesting, engaging set of experiences that we, can set up and programmatically distribute that value through the network using Rilla Network. So that's when it really starts to move the needle for these guys and really starts to close the circle on this sort of change in the economic model. And that's the bit where it starts to get exciting, right? You start to see in abstract networks actually working the way networks are supposed to work. The internet was designed to be a collaborative network where the value of the network being a square of the number of participants flows back to the people based on their contributions, right? And we don't have that in the current centralized, Web 2 state of the internet. We have this, upwards funneling value vacuum going into the pockets of a few bunch of shareholders for the major tech companies. But actually all the value of the internet is coming from these contributors, us as contributors to the internet.
Well, yeah, I think that I understood most of that, but to be honest, I am not technical and neither is most of our audience. So I would say maybe if you could run us through kind of like an end-to-end example of like who's the creator, what's the content they're streaming, how the world would work in like a post Rilla era, and then if that doesn't make enough sense, we can kind of compare it to like how things work now. Let's get concrete. I think that'll work.
Let's get concrete. Like I'll explain this thing, and like when we start to talk about it in terms of generic technology, it does get tricky, right? Because you're sort of juggling a whole bunch of concepts and trying to map it across your view of the world. So I'll tell you a story. Like the best way to explain and the best way to grok things is through stories, right? That's how our brains are kind of trained for many millennia. And so we'll use sports streaming as an example, right? So I grew up in the UK. in the UK, we watch football, right? And so when the World Cup's on, if England's playing, for example, everybody in the UK is watching football. And so if you imagine a block of flats in London, there might be 800 people in the block of flats, and the football's on. Every single person in that block of flats is watching that football on a device, be it a mobile device, tablet, smart TV, a browser on your computer or whatever, right? And they're all watching this football at the same time. Now, currently, the way that traditional CDN works is every single one of those devices is going to make a network request. And that network request for 800 devices, let's say, goes outside of that tower block, down into the street, under the sea, probably to Dublin, where the nearest AWS data center is. And you have 800 requests on the CDN right there. And each one of those requests is charged back to the broadcaster, right? And they're all carrying the same chunk, right? The same piece of that football game that they're trying to watch. 800 of them all the way back across all the network hops back into that tower block and to all of those devices. And that's just not the way the internet was designed. Realistically, one capable device within that tower block needed to make the request, take all the network hops under the sea to Dublin, get that one thing, bring it all the way back, and then it's able to relay and share that with every other device in that tower block and the surrounding area. And what happened over here, it's 800 times cheaper for the broadcaster.
Peer-to-peer. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And you don't need big chunky devices to do this. There's no encoding. There's no transcoding. There's no GPU bound workload here. It's literally just network relaying to one another. And network bandwidth, like it's the one ambient, abundant thing in the internet that we all have. And I don't know where you are, but like here, I've got like 800 megabits up. And I'm not using it. I'm using 0.05% of that on a daily basis, right?
Yeah.
And the entire internet is actually, the topology of the internet at the moment is that way, where we have enormous amounts of redundant upstream bandwidth. And we can utilize that. And we should be able to, as contributors to the network, by being a node within that graph of the internet, we're contributing, and we should be able to reap the benefits of that. And that applies to lots of different use cases other than sports streaming. And that's where, the wider picture of intelligent collaboration networks sort of comes into focus, where we can orchestrate the internet to allow us all to collaborate on problem spaces and receive, the due, compensation for that contribution within that collaboration. And the bit that's tricky is actually trying to get everybody to collaborate in these peer-to-peer networks in a way that is actually near optimal. And so for live streaming, not to get too technical, but for live streaming, you got three main things that you're trying to optimize for. So to optimize for quality, right? You don't want it to buffer. You want the quality of experience to be good. You want to optimize so that you're within a certain amount of latency. So you don't want to hear someone cheer for the goal next door when you're watching in front of you. You want it to be like the latency to be within a certain window. And then finally, cost. And so if you can have absolutely no reduction in quality of experience, you keep latency within a certain window, and then you reduce costs to the maximum, then you have a network that's actually better than existing CDN infrastructure. And it's a network that is programmatically redistributing the value back to the people that are contributing, which is just a healthier state of any network. And so you can apply that to any other problem space. Federated learning is an obvious one. Me and Paul have a background in infrastructure for federated learning and like validation of training workloads across heterogeneous sets of devices. And like, that's the holy grail of what we're trying to do with DeepIn and with, intelligent collaboration networks, essentially. But yeah, hopefully that's helpful. Like, there's a concrete use case and you can sort of extrapolate from that and sort of see how the technology maps across.
100%. Yeah. Now I understand what you mean by get paid for your contributions. I thought it was like a creator monetization thing, but it's really more like a node in the CDN or internet architecture, uploading content peer to peer, using that upload bandwidth, which no one ever really does. I don't. Probably rarely. Maybe right now, I guess, but very rarely do people use the upload. And it makes a lot of sense from like a.
We used to not so long ago.
Yeah.
Right? Like we saw BitTorrent, LimeWire, Napster, etc. Like that's peer to peer, right? And they're clearly very, very good at redistributing media. But it became taboo, right? Like it became this like, oh, you can't do that. It's like, okay, so why did it become taboo? We were actually in 2006, more than 60% of the traffic on the internet was peer to peer. And why did it stop? It stopped because it was actually illegal, right? What everyone was doing was sharing like movies and media without actually paying for it, right? It's pirated. But it wasn't because no one wanted to pay. It was because that was the easiest and best way to get hold of. I mean, some people couldn't pay, but it was the easiest and best way to get hold of like a library of good content. And what was the problem? The problem is that we couldn't attribute the value and programmatically distribute the value back to the people who were actually putting the value into the network, which was the people creating the content in that context. But we have the technology to do that now, right? Like since 2006, we've come a long way, and our ability to attribute value and programmatically distribute value through blockchain has eventuated. And so live streaming and also for video on demand as well. There's like Rilla Network provides a really interesting solution where we allow value to programmatically be distributed based on contribution. And in this case, the application is about infrastructure contribution, right? Contributing network to reduce infrastructure cost.
Yeah. No, I can see how, I mean, there's obviously a deep angle here too, but I can see how kind of like individual nodes helping broadcast content peer to peer would get compensated using blockchain technology and token incentives. But what about, say, like the actual owner of the content, so like the Saudi, sports group, like instead of using that, blending that with the London example of the 800 flats, like instead of them being able to very easily track, like, okay, this live stream content was pulled 800 times from the AWS server in Dublin. Now it's like been pulled once, but it's been kind of like reduplicated or reshared peer-to-peer 800 times. Are they still able to track all of those and like make money from all of those kind of like end users, or how do you guys enable that? Because that's kind of like the issue you just said with peer-to-peer and LimeWire and all of that, was that the owner of the content couldn't basically track and monetize. So yeah, how do you guys enable that?
Yeah, I'll explain it just in concrete, right? So the broadcasters of sports for this particular use case are integrating the Rilla Network SDKs into their applications. So as a user of their applications, you might be on like Android TV. You might be, watching on a streaming platform. The app has an update. You update your app on Android TV, and now you've pulled down the Rilla Network SDKs that have been integrated into the application, and now you're able to act as a node and relay. And so that broadcaster that's broadcasting their sport immediately starts to reduce their dependency on CDN and their resulting CDN costs. But they are within their app, they can see exactly what's going on. And Rilla Network provides a whole bunch of analytics and observability back to them so they can see exactly what's happening. And that's really important because what matters to these people is engagement, reducing churn, and turning passive audiences into active networks. And so this visibility and this concept of contribution and people coming together and contributing in things like sport, where it's, the last bastion of tribal viewing, where you have, tribal fandom, and everybody's coming together and chipping together within this crowd. And the broadcasters are able to redistribute like awesome value into those communities. And it's really up to them how they want to redistribute the value, right? And so, in the first instance, you can see them going, the reflex is like, oh, this is great. We can stuff this money into the pockets of our shareholders, But when they stop and think about it, they're like, hold on a second. Probably what we want to do is redistribute that value, or at least a portion of that value, in a way that starts to give us an edge on competitors, give us some improvement in some of these metrics. And that might look like redistributing some discounts and stuff if they're not really necessarily thinking about it very deeply. But where we're going with it is full gamification of viewership, right? And this is some of the proof of concept stuff we're rolling out next year, is fully gamifying fandom around that stuff and providing them with the protocol that enables them to do that in a way that's meaningful and in a way that really makes sense in terms of the redistribution of that value. And so that's super exciting for them. And it's just another example of recognizing the value of the contribution, because they're contributing in terms of their upstream bandwidth, but they're also contributing in many other ways, right? Sports is not sports without fans. The fans that bring the vibe to those stadiums and to those pubs and etc. And right, that's the vibe of the entire culture around sport. And so it gives a way of like recognizing and redistributing the value based on that contribution. And that's big for them. That's an interesting one.
For sure. Yeah, no, that example made a lot of sense. I know we're a little over time already, so let's just go rapid fire through these last 4 segments. I want to hit supply side, blockchain choice, demand side, and then token. So on supply side, basically, like, what are the types of hardware purchases or software integrations that like someone would need to have to contribute as a node here?
So there's different layers to this network. Essentially, this is a heterogeneous set of devices. So the protocol will run across a very wide range of devices. You have what we call a light relay, which is essentially a passive node where you might be watching, NBA, for example, and you might not know that you're actually relaying. You're just passively relaying. You might know that you're in this program for contributors and that you might win like a trip to go to the All-Star game or whatever, but you won't know like what you're doing technically or actively. So that's like a passive relay, and that will run on your smart TV. It'll run on your like iOS or Android device. It'll run on a tablet, a laptop, and a browser, and we're just like cross-compiling into all of those platforms. But then there's the next layer, which I think is what you were sort of leaning towards, which is the active node operators. And so you don't need to have like a chunky device to do this. You can do this on anything that has stable uptime and stable upstream bandwidth. And so we're rolling out like our launch to community next year. End of Q1, maybe mid Q2, depending on, we'll do like a stage rollout. And what it'll be is like download an app on your devices and start to contribute to our testing network. And so you'll be able to be an active node operator from your iOS device, from your smart TV, from your Raspberry Pi, right? Anything that you can keep up and keep upstream bandwidth around. And so having that passively running in the background on smart TVs while you're not there is a great way to get involved in what we're doing. And we kick off with a testing network, but then that rolls into actually being a dedicated relay within the network and receiving meaningful rewards for your contribution into the network.
Cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What blockchain do you plan to build on if you've selected one?
TBC.
And why? TBC.
Yeah.
Okay. To be confirmed.
Yeah.
At first I thought that might be like an abbreviation for a new blockchain.
Scanning the landscape.
There's a new one every day.
Yeah. To be confirmed. We're in conversations with multiple L1s and Ethereum layer 2s at the moment. And honestly, it doesn't matter too much for us. We don't need, specific throughput or characteristics. We can run on pretty much any smart contract chain. So it's about community. It's about, positioning ourselves right and getting the support we need. And so we're in those conversations at the moment. That'll probably be announced early next year.
Okay. I mean, you spoke about, I guess, early demand side a bit already with some proof of concepts, but do you see the use cases primarily being around live sports streaming as the first use case, and like, you know, what other use cases or customer profiles do you see in the future?
Yeah, so this is a viable business, right? We can go and roll out Rilla Network to sports streaming alone and become a, you know, 8-figure ARR business over the coming years. And we're running at that. Like, we're focused on this. One of the things that we have as like shared values as a team is we're all about going fully vertically through and delivering value. You can pontificate and wave your arms about technology and come up with super smart ideas about what the future is going to look like. But if you don't realize the value of technology, what does that mean? You might as well go write a sci-fi novel, which is valuable, right? But it's not delivering the value today. It's long. You're going long on the value of that. So we'll execute on live streaming, absolutely. But at the same time, we want to open source and get the core intelligent collaboration network toolkit and protocol out in the wild and build a strong foundation around that to be able to support people and other projects to come on board and start using what we built, which is essentially the ability to train and fine tune AI models to be able to continually optimize and orchestrate peer-to-peer, and then attribute and redistribute value based on the contributions in peer-to-peer networks. And that's actually, it's profound. Once you start to unpack it and look at what that means, it's a profound force I see in where we're going, which is the decentralization of a re-decentralization of the internet. And we're excited about that part too.
Yeah, it sounds like you're trying to build a protocol versus an application. There's going to be applications that are built on top or specific use cases or specific business lines or revenue streams, but you're trying to build the underlying protocol that is open source and allows for all of that.
That's it, but without a reference implementation and without a real business model on top of it that shows how it changes a whole industry. Like, we're going to rewire the way that the value flows around, the live streaming economy. And that's where the profound impact is, that makes people dig deeper and get down to the protocol and understand it, right? You, just like before, you were like, I didn't get a lot of that until I told you the story about the concrete like value unlock. And then you were like, light bulbs. And then we can like dig a little bit deeper. And like, we have to do that like with the do. We got to go and like actually build that business and rewire that economy and then point to the protocol and go, that's how you do it. And now everybody jump in and make it happen. So yeah, both in tandem, but leading by example and showing people how it really can realize the value. Because I think there's so much talent been put into abstract technology in Web3, where a lot of people just never understand what it is people are doing. And so the value never eventuates.
That's why we like Deepen, for sure. Last question for you is, what can you tell me about the token? Will there be one? When do you think it will launch? Is it the typical supply side token incentives and demand side kind of buy and burn for value accrual, or do you have different plans for it if there will be one?
So we're working with Helix partners, and we're kicking off in Dubai here, workshopping on token design and getting our white paper fleshed out in January. We got a bunch of whiteboarding and ideas about how this should work, but it's TBC. There will be a token because the attribution distribution of value doesn't work without a token. The mechanics of that token, the general design is TBC, but we'll put our white paper out probably early Fed. And so you'll see that come out if you follow us, and we're pretty quiet at the moment, but we'll start to make a little bit of noise next year. We talk a bit on LinkedIn, but we'll start to make a bit of noise on Twitter next year as well. And so you should see that come down the pipe, and then you'll get some of the answers that you're looking for.
Yeah, no, I know it's early, but if you have a call to action for our community, where would you want to point them to find out more info or follow along?
I think I follow on Twitter, because that's where most people are in the Web3 sphere. If you straddle these worlds, hop on LinkedIn as well. I'm active on both. I'm a bit of a ghost on Twitter at the moment, but next year I'm going to start talking a lot more and sharing what we're doing. It's been a really head down year. And so, yeah, my handle's at Hally9K, Hally 9K. You can throw me a follow and you'll start to see stuff coming down the pipe. And then you can also get at Rilla Network as well. And we'll start to make a bit of noise about what we're doing as we build things up. And then if anyone's in Dubai, if you're coming in for token next year or whatever, like shout if you're into Deepin and you want to like, you know, grab a drink and talk about the stuff and chuck ideas around. That's literally my favorite thing to do. So yeah, feel free to, you know, shoot me a DM or whatever. And if you're in the area, let's jam.
100%. Well, Hal, great to have you on. Thank you for sharing your time with us, and excited to follow along with you and Rilla's progress over the next 6 months, 12 months.
Awesome. Thanks, Connor. Cheers.